When my daughter told me to find somewhere else to die, you're useless now, I packed my bags like the obedient mother I'd always been. 3 days later, I was sitting in a lawyer's office discovering that my supposedly loving husband had played the longest game of chess in history. Victoria was about to learn that sometimes the pawn becomes the queen. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me tell you how I went from homeless widow to the woman holding all the cards. Because, honey, this story has more twists than a pretzel factory. 2 months ago, I was Margaret Sullivan, devoted wife of 43 years and mother to one spectacularly ungrateful daughter. When Robert died of a heart attack at 71, I thought my world was ending. Victoria swooped in during my grief like a vulture in designer clothes, cooing about how difficult this must be for me. "Mom, you can't possibly manage this big house alone," she'd said, her voice dripping with fake concern. The stairs, the maintenance, all those memories. It's not healthy. I should have seen the calculation behind her concern. Victoria had always been Robert's favorite, his little princess who could do no wrong. When she married that investment banker Kevin and started producing grandchildren, Robert doted on them all. Meanwhile, I was just the woman who cooked and cleaned and kept everything running smoothly. After the funeral, Victoria became increasingly insistent about my situation. She'd bring Kevin over for family dinners where they'd corner me with real estate pamphlets and retirement community brochures. "Mom, these places are wonderful. You'd have people your own age, activities, no responsibilities." What they meant was no inheritance to split, no inconvenient mother to deal with. The final blow came last Tuesday. I'd been living in what Victoria now called our house for 6 weeks since Robert's death, still sleeping in the guest room because I couldn't bear to pack up our bedroom. Victoria arrived unannounced with Kevin and 2 large suitcases. "Mom, we've made a decision. Kevin got the promotion, and we need to move into town immediately. This house is perfect for us." I stared at her, not quite comprehending. "Move in? But this is my home." Victoria's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold calculation underneath. "Actually, Mom, according to Dad's will, I inherited everything. The house, the investments, all of it. I've been letting you stay here out of kindness, but it's time for you to find your own place." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Victoria, surely there's been some mistake." "No mistake. Dad knew I'd take better care of his legacy than you ever could. You never understood money or investments. You were just the wife, just the wife." 43 years reduced to those 3 words. That's when she delivered the killing blow. "Find somewhere else to die. You're useless now." I packed my things in a daze, 43 years of marriage fitting into 2 suitcases and a small box of photos. Victoria watched from the doorway, checking her watch like I was making her late for something important. "There's a nice senior complex on Maple Street," she offered with the enthusiasm of someone recommending a decent restaurant. "Very affordable. I'm sure they have openings." Affordable. My daughter was inheriting $33 million, and she was suggesting I check into what was essentially a welfare facility for the elderly. Kevin loaded my suitcases into their BMW with the efficiency of someone disposing of garbage. "Margaret, you'll love having your independence again," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "No more worrying about house maintenance or property taxes. No more home," he meant. As we drove away, I watched my house, Robert's house, Victoria's house now, disappear in the rearview mirror. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 4 decades making that house a home, hosting Victoria's birthday parties, nursing Robert through his illness, maintaining every detail he cared about. Now I was being driven to a budget motel like an unwanted guest who'd overstayed her welcome. The Sunset Inn was exactly what you'd expect from a place charging $49 a night. Thin walls, thinner towels, and a carpet that had seen better decades. Victoria handed me $200 in cash like she was tipping a hotel maid. "This should cover you for a few days while you get settled," she said. "I'll have Kevin transfer some money into your account once we sort through Dad's paperwork." Some money. From my own inheritance. After they left, I sat on the sagging mattress and tried to process what had just happened. In the span of 3 hours, I'd gone from grieving widow to homeless senior citizen. The woman I'd raised, loved, and sacrificed for had discarded me like an expired prescription. But as I sat there in that depressing motel room, something began nagging at me. Robert had always been meticulous about his affairs, obsessively organized about important documents. He'd shown me the will years ago, explaining his wishes, making sure I understood everything. And I was absolutely certain that's not what it had said. Robert had been many things. Traditional, sometimes stubborn, occasionally patronizing about money matters. But he wasn't cruel. The man who'd held my hand through my mother's death, who'd surprised me with flowers every anniversary, wouldn't have left me destitute. The next morning, I used the motel's Wi-Fi to search for Robert's attorney, Harrison Fitzgerald, the same lawyer who'd handled our house purchase and various business matters over the years. His office was downtown, a 20-minute bus ride that cost me precious cash but felt necessary. Harrison Fitzgerald was a distinguished man in his 70s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. When his secretary announced that Mrs. Sullivan was here about her husband's estate, he looked genuinely surprised. "Margaret, my dear, I was wondering when you'd come in. I tried calling your house several times, but Victoria said you were traveling." Traveling. That's what my daughter had told him. "Mr. Fitzgerald, I need to ask you about Robert's will." He looked puzzled. "Of course. Didn't Victoria provide you with your copy?" I gave her the original and several copies after the reading. My stomach dropped. There was a reading? "Margaret, you were supposed to be there. Victoria said you were too distraught, that she'd handle everything and make sure you received your inheritance." The blood drained from my face as the reality hit me. "Mr. Fitzgerald, I was never told about any reading. Victoria told me she inherited everything." Harrison Fitzgerald's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. He reached for a thick file folder, his movements suddenly urgent. "Margaret, that's impossible. Your husband's will is very specific about your inheritance." He pulled out a document I recognized, Robert's neat signature at the bottom, witnessed and notarized. But as Harrison began reading, I realized Victoria had lied about everything. "I, Robert James Sullivan, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath to my beloved wife Margaret Ann Sullivan the following: our primary residence at 847 Oakwood Drive, including all furnishings and personal effects. Additionally, I leave her 70% of all financial assets, investments and accounts, totaling approximately $23 million. My head started spinning. $23 million. The house, 70% of everything. Harrison continued reading, his voice growing more serious. To my daughter Victoria Sullivan Hayes, I leave $10 million, to be held in trust with distributions beginning on her 45th birthday, contingent upon her treatment of her mother following my death, contingent upon her treatment of me. Robert had known. Somehow, he'd known exactly what Victoria would try to do. "Mr. Fitzgerald," I whispered, "Victoria told me I inherited nothing. She moved into my house. She gave me $200 and suggested I find a senior facility." The elderly lawyer's face flushed with anger. "Margaret, what Victoria has done is called elder abuse and fraud. She's committed multiple felonies. But she had legal documents. She showed me papers. Forged, most likely. Or documents from an earlier draft. Your husband updated his will 6 months before his death, specifically because he was concerned about Victoria's attitude toward money and her sense of entitlement." The room was spinning. All those times Victoria had dismissed my opinions, talked over me during family dinners, rolled her eyes when I tried to contribute to conversations about their expensive vacations or Kevin's business deals. Robert had been watching, evaluating, making decisions. "There's more, Margaret. The trust provision for Victoria specifically states that if she fails to treat you with respect and dignity following my death, the entire $10 million reverts to you instead." I stared at him in shock. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying your daughter just cost herself $10 million. Her inheritance is now yours as well. You're not inheriting $23 million, Margaret. You're inheriting $33 million, plus the house and all personal property." The irony was so perfect it was almost funny. Victoria had been so eager to claim her inheritance that she'd triggered the exact clause designed to protect me from her greed. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Harrison smiled, and for the first time since Robert's death, I saw genuine warmth directed at me. "Now, my dear, we call the police about the fraud." And then we call Victoria and inform her that she's about to receive the shock of her life. Can she fight this? With what money? She's about to discover that every account she thought she controlled actually belongs to you. Every investment, every bank account, every asset except your house is frozen pending investigation of her fraudulent activities. I thought about Victoria in my house, probably already planning renovations, shopping for new furniture with money she thought was hers. Kevin was probably calculating how the inheritance would affect his investment portfolio. They had no idea that in about 6 hours, their entire world was going to implode. Harrison Fitzgerald's office became command central for what he cheerfully called Operation Justice. He contacted the police, the banks, and a private investigator while I sat in his leather chair, still processing the magnitude of Victoria's deception. The forged documents are quite sophisticated, Detective Rodriguez explained as she reviewed the fake will Victoria had shown me. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime. Someone planned this carefully. You think Victoria had help? I asked. Almost certainly. Creating convincing legal forgeries requires specific knowledge and connections. We'll need to investigate whether Kevin or someone in his financial network was involved. Within 2 hours, every account had been frozen. Victoria's credit cards, linked to what she thought were her new inheritance accounts, were declined. The house utilities, which she'd already transferred to her name, were suspended pending ownership verification. My phone rang at exactly 3:47 p.m. Victoria's name flashed on the screen. "Mom, where are you?" "There's some kind of mix-up with the bank accounts. They're saying Daddy's assets are frozen." "Hello, Victoria. I'm sitting in Harrison Fitzgerald's office. You remember him? Daddy's attorney, the one who read the real will to an empty room while you told him I was traveling." Silence. Then, "Mom, I don't know what you think you discovered, but I discovered that you're a liar and a thief, sweetheart. I also discovered that your father was much smarter than either of us realized. You don't understand. I was protecting you from the complexity of managing all that money. You've never had to deal with investments or, I understand perfectly. You forged legal documents, committed fraud, and threw your 67-year-old mother out of her own house because you thought I was too stupid to notice." Her voice turned sharp, desperate. "Mom, you're confused. The grief has been overwhelming, and someone is obviously taking advantage of your emotional state." The audacity was breathtaking. Even caught red-handed, Victoria was trying to manipulate me. "Victoria, dear, let me clarify something for you. Not only did you never inherit anything, but your actual inheritance, the $10 million your father left you, is now mine as well, thanks to a lovely clause he included about treating me with dignity and respect. That's impossible. Detective Rodriguez is sitting right here if you'd like to discuss the impossibility of fraud charges with her." The phone went quiet. I could almost hear Victoria's mind racing, calculating, searching for an angle. "Mom, please, can we meet somewhere and talk about this reasonably? I'm sure we can work something out." "Oh, we'll definitely be meeting soon. At the courthouse, when you're arraigned. You wouldn't dare press charges against your own daughter." Something cold and final crystallized in my chest. "Watch me." I hung up and looked at Harrison, who was beaming with approval. "How long before she's arrested?" "Detective Rodriguez has enough evidence for a warrant. They'll pick her up this evening." "And Kevin?" "His financial records are being subpoenaed. If he participated in creating those documents, he'll face charges too." My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Mom, please don't do this. Think about the grandchildren." I showed the message to Detective Rodriguez, who smiled grimly. "Emotional manipulation. Classic behavior pattern for this type of crime." I typed back, "I'm thinking about them. They deserve to see what happens when you steal from family." 20 minutes later, Kevin called. "Margaret, surely we can resolve this privately. Victoria made some poor decisions, but involving the police seems excessive. Kevin, did you help her forge those documents?" That's not..." "Margaret, you have to understand the pressure Victoria was under. She was worried about your mental state, your ability to handle large sums of money. So that's a yes. It wasn't malicious. She genuinely believed she was protecting you. By throwing me out of my house and telling me to find somewhere to die?" Kevin was quiet. "Kevin, here's what's going to happen. You're both going to be arrested. You're both going to face federal fraud charges. And I'm going to be sitting in my house, watching it all unfold. Margaret, please, Be reasonable. I was reasonable for 43 years. It didn't work out well for me. The police arrested Victoria at 8:30 p.m. while she was having dinner at Le Bernardin, apparently celebrating her inheritance with Kevin and another couple. According to Detective Rodriguez, she screamed about false arrest and demanded to call her lawyer, who turned out to be Kevin's golf buddy and had no experience with criminal law. Kevin was arrested at his office the next morning. The forensic accountant had traced the forged documents to a printing company Kevin's firm used for creating fraudulent investment prospectuses. Apparently, my son-in-law had quite the criminal resume that Victoria either didn't know about or chose to ignore. I spent my first night back in my house in 43 years, sleeping in the master bedroom. Victoria had already moved her belongings into the space, replacing Robert's careful organization with her chaos of designer clothes and expensive cosmetics. I packed everything into garbage bags and left them on the front porch. Let her collect them when she makes bail. The house felt different now, not because Robert was gone, but because I was finally seeing it as mine. For decades, I'd maintained it as Robert's sanctuary, designed around his preferences, his needs, his vision of how we should live. Now, looking around with clear eyes, I realized how little of me had ever been reflected in these rooms. That was about to change. Harrison called around noon with updates. Victoria's bail is set at $50,000. Since all her accounts are frozen, she'll have to find someone else to cover it. What about Kevin? $200,000. Apparently the judge wasn't impressed with his history of financial crimes. Who knew your son-in-law had been under investigation for securities fraud? I certainly hadn't known. But then again, I'd been excluded from most family financial discussions. Victoria and Kevin had always spoken to me like I was a child when money came up, simplifying concepts they assumed I couldn't understand. They were about to learn how much I'd actually understood. Harrison, I want to make some changes to the house. Victoria had contractors lined up to renovate. I'd like to proceed with some of those plans, but with my own vision. Excellent idea. It's your home now, Margaret. Do whatever makes you happy. What made me happy, I realized, was the idea of undoing every assumption Victoria had made about my inheritance. She planned to gut the kitchen, replace the hardwood floors, and convert Robert's study into a wine cellar. I was going to turn the study into an art studio and the wine cellar plans into a library. My phone rang. Unknown number. Mrs. Sullivan, this is Janet Cooper from Channel 7 News. We understand you're the victim of a significant elder fraud case involving your daughter. Would you be willing to share your story? Word was getting out. In a city this size, the arrest of a prominent investment banker and his wife for defrauding his elderly mother-in-law was news. Ms. Cooper, I appreciate your interest, but I'm not ready to make public statements. I understand this must be difficult, but your story could help other seniors recognize warning signs of family financial abuse. She had a point. How many other women my age were being manipulated by adult children who saw them as inconvenient obstacles to inheritance? If I decided to tell my story, would I have control over how it's presented? Absolutely. We could arrange a sit-down interview where you'd have approval over the final edit. I thought about Victoria, probably sitting in a jail cell right now, still believing this was all a misunderstanding she could charm her way out of. Ms. Cooper, let me get back to you. I might have quite a story to tell. After hanging up, I poured myself a glass of the expensive wine Kevin had sent us for Christmas. Wine I was apparently now drinking in my own house, purchased with my own money, while contemplating whether to publicly humiliate my daughter on television. Life had certainly taken an interesting turn. The doorbell rang at 7 a.m. sharp. Through the window, I could see Victoria on my front porch, wearing yesterday's clothes and looking like she'd aged 5 years overnight. She'd made bail somehow. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. Mom, please, we need to talk. We talked yesterday. You told me to find somewhere to die. I found somewhere to live instead. Victoria's eyes were red-rimmed. Her usual perfect composure completely shattered. I made mistakes. Terrible mistakes, but I'm still your daughter. Are you? Because daughters don't typically forge legal documents to steal their mother's inheritances. I wasn't stealing. I was... She stopped, clearly struggling to find words that didn't sound criminal. You were what, Victoria? I was trying to protect you from making poor financial decisions. You've never managed large amounts of money. Even now, Even after being arrested for fraud, she couldn't admit the truth. In Victoria's mind, she was still the victim of my unreasonable expectations. Victoria, let me share something your father told me 6 months before he died. He said he was worried about your sense of entitlement, your attitude toward money, and how you treated people you considered beneath you. Her face went pale. Daddy never said that. He said you reminded him of his sister Eleanor. Beautiful, charming, and completely incapable of thinking about anyone but yourself. He told me he was changing the will specifically because he was afraid of what you'd do to me if you had control. That's a lie. I pulled out my phone and showed her a voice recording. Actually, it's not. Your father recorded a video message explaining his decision, to be played if you ever contested the will or if you treated me poorly after his death. Victoria stared at the phone like it was a poisonous snake. He knew, sweetheart. He knew exactly who you were underneath all that charm. The only thing he didn't predict was how far you'd actually go. Play it, she whispered. I touched the screen, and Robert's voice filled the morning air. Clear, measured, and absolutely devastating. If you're hearing this, Victoria, it means my fears about your character were justified. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped that my daughter had more integrity than I suspected. But if Margaret is playing this recording, it means you've proven me right in the worst possible way. Victoria sank onto the porch steps as Robert's voice continued. I spent 43 years watching your mother sacrifice her dreams, her ambitions, her independence to take care of our family. She worked part-time jobs to help pay for your college while I built my business. She postponed her education, gave up career opportunities, and poured herself into being the wife and mother she thought we needed. The recording continued for 3 more minutes, each word carefully chosen, each sentence a scalpel cutting through Victoria's justifications and self-deceptions. By the time you hear this, you'll have discovered that treating your mother poorly has cost you everything. I hope it was worth it. When it ended, Victoria was crying. Not the pretty tears she'd used to manipulate people since childhood, but ugly, broken sobs. He hated me, she whispered. No, Victoria. He loved you enough to hope you'd prove him wrong. You chose to prove him right instead. She looked up at me, mascara streaking her cheeks. What happens now? Now you face the consequences of your choices. The fraud charges, the investigation, the public humiliation when this story hits the news. The news? Channel 7 wants to interview me about elder financial abuse. I'm thinking of saying yes. Victoria's face crumpled completely. Mom, please, think about what this will do to the grandchildren, to Kevin's career, to our whole family. I am thinking about it. I'm thinking about how you didn't consider any of those things when you decided to commit multiple felonies. She stood up slowly, looking older and more defeated than I'd ever seen her. I know you won't believe this, but I never meant for it to go this far. I wanted the money. I wanted the security, the status. I wanted to never have to worry about anything again. For the first time since this nightmare began, Victoria was telling the truth. I believe you, sweetheart, but wanting something doesn't justify destroying people to get it. She nodded, tears still flowing. What can I do to fix this? You can start by admitting what you did was wrong. Not misguided, not protective, not complicated. Wrong. It was wrong. It was completely, unforgivably wrong. And then you can face whatever consequences come next with some dignity, instead of trying to manipulate your way out of them. Victoria looked at me for a long moment, seeing perhaps for the first time not the pushover mother she'd always known, but the woman who'd just outmaneuvered her completely. I deserved this, didn't I? Yes, Victoria, you absolutely did. 3 days after Victoria's porch confession, Kevin's mother showed up at my door. Eleanor Hayes was everything I'd expected. Perfectly coiffed, dripping with jewelry, and radiating the kind of entitlement that only comes from 3 generations of inherited wealth. Margaret, we need to discuss this situation rationally. I invited her in, curious to see what version of reality the Hayes family had constructed to explain their son's felony charges. Eleanor settled herself in my living room like she was granting me an audience. Kevin made some poor choices, obviously, but prosecuting him seems rather vindictive, don't you think? Vindictive? Your son helped steal my inheritance and threw me out of my own house. Kevin was following Victoria's lead. He didn't understand the full situation. The woman was actually trying to blame my daughter for her son's criminal behavior. I had to admire the audacity. Mrs. Hayes, Kevin created forged legal documents. That's not following someone's lead. That's conspiracy to commit fraud. Kevin's lawyer believes we can reach a settlement that benefits everyone. You get your house back, Victoria faces appropriate consequences, and Kevin avoids the publicity of a trial. Appropriate consequences. As if Victoria's crimes were a minor etiquette violation. What kind of settlement? Eleanor smiled, clearly believing she'd found an opening. Kevin's family is prepared to compensate you for your inconvenience. Let's say $2 million in exchange for dropping the charges against Kevin. $2 million. To forgive the man who'd helped steal $33 million from me. Mrs. Hayes, your son participated in a scheme that cost me everything I owned. You think $2 million covers that? Margaret, be realistic. Kevin has a career, children, a reputation to maintain. Sending him to prison serves no one. It serves justice. Eleanor's polished facade cracked slightly. Justice? You're destroying multiple families over money you'd never have known how to manage anyway. There it was. The same condescending attitude that had poisoned my relationship with Victoria. In their world, I was just the help who'd gotten uppity. Mrs. Hayes, I think we're done here. Margaret, please reconsider. $5 million. Final offer. $5 million to let Kevin walk free. The amount was staggering, but the principle was non-negotiable. My answer is no. Eleanor stood, her composure completely restored. Very well, but you should know that Kevin's legal team has found some interesting information about your husband's business practices. It would be unfortunate if that became public during the trial. The threat was clear, but I felt no fear, only curiosity. What kind of information? The kind that might make you reconsider who the real criminal in this situation was. After she left, I called Harrison immediately. Margaret, whatever they think they've found, it doesn't change the facts of Victoria and Kevin's crimes. But could it affect the case? Potentially. If they can muddy the waters enough, create doubt about Robert's character or business practices, it might influence a jury. I thought about Robert, about our marriage, about all the secrets that might be buried in 43 years of shared life. Harrison, I want to know everything about Robert's business, every deal, every partnership, every potential irregularity. Margaret, are you sure? Sometimes the past is better left alone. The Hayes family is threatening to drag Robert's memory through the mud to protect their criminal son. I'd rather know the truth first. That evening, I sat in Robert's study, my study now, and began going through his files systematically. Robert had been meticulously organized, every document dated and categorized. But as I dug deeper into his business records, I began finding things that didn't quite make sense. Payments to shell companies, consulting fees that seemed excessive, partnerships with firms that appeared to exist only on paper. By midnight, I'd discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about my husband. The private investigator Harrison recommended was a sharp-eyed woman named Carol Chen, who specialized in financial crimes. She spent 6 hours in Robert's study, photographing documents and building what she called the real picture of my husband's business empire. Mrs. Sullivan, your husband was running a sophisticated money laundering operation through his consulting firm. We're talking about millions of dollars in illegal transactions over the past decade. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. That's impossible. Robert was the most honest man I knew. I'm sorry, but the evidence is overwhelming. He was washing money for organized crime families, using his legitimate business as a front. I stared at the documents spread across Robert's desk. Invoices for services never rendered, consulting contracts with companies that didn't exist, payment schedules that corresponded with known criminal activities. How long has this been going on? Based on these records, at least 12 years, probably longer. 12 years. While I was planning dinner parties and attending charity galas, my husband was facilitating criminal enterprises. Mrs. Sullivan, there's more. The $10 million Robert left Victoria, that money came directly from laundered funds. If the FBI discovers this, they'll seize everything as proceeds of criminal activity. The room started spinning. Everything? The house? The investments? All of it. Unless what? Carol looked uncomfortable. Unless Victoria and Kevin's legal team already knows about this and is planning to use it as leverage. If they tip off the FBI about your husband's crimes, they might be able to negotiate immunity in exchange for cooperation. My daughter and her husband weren't just thieves. They were holding a nuclear weapon over my head. What are my options? Legally? You could contact the FBI yourself, come forward voluntarily, and hope for leniency. You'd lose most of the money, but you might keep the house. And if I don't? Victoria and Kevin's lawyers will probably leak this information strategically. You'll lose everything anyway. But you'll also face potential charges for unknowingly benefiting from criminal activity. I thought about Eleanor Hayes' smug confidence, her certainty that I'd accept their settlement offer. They'd known about Robert's crimes all along. Carol, how did they find out about this? Kevin's an investment banker. He'd have recognized the patterns in your husband's financial records. The question is, what are they planning to do with this information? My phone rang. Victoria's number. Mom, we need to meet. Tonight. There are things you need to know about Daddy that change everything. I already know. Victoria. Silence. Then, you know what? I know about the money laundering. I know about the criminal connections. I know that everything your father left us is tainted. Mom, listen to me carefully. Kevin's lawyers have been in contact with the FBI. They're willing to let us renegotiate our situation. What kind of renegotiation? Kevin gets immunity in exchange for providing information about Daddy's criminal network. You get to keep $5 million and the house. The rest goes to the government. And you? The fraud charges disappear. We all walk away from this mess. It was brilliant. In a sociopathic way, Victoria had turned my moral victory into her strategic advantage. Victoria, you're asking me to help you profit from your crimes by exploiting Daddy's crimes. I'm asking you to be practical. The alternative is losing everything and potentially facing charges yourself. I looked around Robert's study, seeing it clearly for the first time. The expensive furniture, the rare books, the art collection, all of it purchased with blood money. I need time to think. Mom, the FBI meeting is tomorrow morning. Kevin's lawyer needs an answer tonight. After hanging up, I sat in the darkness of Robert's study, surrounded by the evidence of his double life. 43 years of marriage to a stranger. A daughter who'd inherited more than money from her father. She'd inherited his talent for deception. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated who I was when my back was against the wall. I picked up the phone and dialed Carol Chen. Carol, how quickly can you get me a meeting with the FBI? I have a story to tell them, and I think they're going to find it very interesting. FBI agent Sarah Martinez looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for a federal investigator. Serious, intelligent, and completely immune to charm. She sat across from me in Harrison's conference room, recording our conversation and taking notes with mechanical precision. Mrs. Sullivan, you understand that by coming forward voluntarily, you're potentially admitting to benefiting from criminal proceeds? I understand. But I'd rather tell you the truth than let my daughter and her husband manipulate this situation to their advantage. I laid out everything. Robert's hidden business, Victoria's fraud scheme, Kevin's forgeries, and the extortion attempt masquerading as a settlement offer. Your daughter believes she can trade information about your husband's crimes for immunity from her own charges? That's exactly what she believes, and she thinks I'll cooperate because I'm afraid of losing everything. Agent Martinez smiled for the first time. Are you afraid, Mrs. Sullivan? Agent Martinez, 2 weeks ago I was a grieving widow sleeping in a budget motel. Today I'm sitting here voluntarily confessing to federal agents about my dead husband's criminal enterprise. Fear is no longer my primary emotion. What is? Anger. Pure, crystallized anger at being manipulated by people who underestimated my intelligence for decades. Agent Martinez's smile widened. Mrs. Sullivan, would you be willing to wear a wire? 3 hours later, I was sitting in my living room with a recording device taped to my chest, waiting for Victoria and Kevin to arrive for what they thought was a surrender meeting. They knocked at exactly 8 p.m., both dressed like they were attending a business dinner. Kevin carried a briefcase that probably contained immunity agreements and settlement papers. Mom, you look better than you have in weeks, Victoria said, kissing my cheek like nothing had happened. I feel better. Clarity has that effect. Kevin opened his briefcase with the efficiency of someone who'd conducted similar negotiations before. Margaret, Our lawyers have structured this very favorably for you. You retain the house, $5 million in clean assets, and complete immunity from any charges related to Robert's activities. Clean assets. That's an interesting phrase. Victoria shot Kevin a warning look. Mom, the important thing is that we're all protected. The past stays buried, and we all move forward. What about the $33 million Robert actually left me? Mom, that money is tainted. It can't be separated from Daddy's criminal activities. Taking $5 million is the best outcome possible. And you two? What do you get out of this arrangement? Kevin leaned forward, his confidence returning. We get to put this unfortunate misunderstanding behind us. Victoria's charges disappear. My reputation remains intact, and our family can heal. Misunderstanding. He was still calling felony fraud a misunderstanding. Kevin, help me understand something. When exactly did you discover Robert's criminal activities? What do you mean? Did you know about the money laundering when you married Victoria? Or did you discover it recently when you were planning to steal my inheritance? Kevin and Victoria exchanged glances. Margaret, I don't think that's relevant to our current discussion. Actually, I think it's very relevant. Because if you knew about Robert's crimes and said nothing, that makes you an accessory after the fact. And if you only discovered them while committing your own crimes, that makes you remarkably unlucky. Victoria's composure was starting to crack. Mom, what are you getting at? I'm getting at the fact that you two have been planning this for months, possibly years. The forged will, the money laundering discovery, even Kevin's connections to document forgers, none of this was spontaneous. That's ridiculous. Is it? Agent Martinez finds it quite plausible. The color drained from both their faces. Agent Martinez? Kevin whispered. FBI. She's been very interested in my story about systematic elder abuse, fraud, and extortion, particularly the part where you tried to blackmail me with my dead husband's crimes. Kevin stood up abruptly, reaching for his briefcase. Margaret, this conversation is over. Actually, Kevin, I think it's just beginning. Agent Martinez and 2 other federal agents entered my living room as Victoria and Kevin sat frozen in place. The briefcase Kevin had been reaching for was confiscated immediately, along with both their phones. Victoria Sullivan Hayes and Kevin Hayes, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, elder abuse, and attempted extortion of a federal witness. Victoria turned to me with an expression of absolute betrayal. Mom, how could you do this to your own family? The same way you could forge legal documents and steal my inheritance, sweetheart, except my way is legal. As the agents handcuffed them, Kevin tried one last desperate play. Margaret, you don't understand what you've done. There are people connected to Robert's business who won't appreciate federal attention. You've put yourself in danger. Agent Martinez paused in reading them their rights. Mr. Hayes, are you threatening a federal witness? I'm warning her about the reality of her situation. The reality, Agent Martinez said, is that you just added witness intimidation to your charges. After they were removed, Agent Martinez sat back down across from me. Mrs. Sullivan, Kevin's warning might not be entirely empty. Your husband was connected to some dangerous people. How dangerous? The Torino crime family, primarily. They've been using legitimate businesses to launder money for decades. Your husband's consulting firm was one of their most successful operations. The name meant nothing to me, but the agent's expression told me everything I needed to know. Are you saying I'm in actual physical danger? Potentially, but there's something else you should know about your husband's operation. Something that changes everything. Agent Martinez pulled out a thick file folder, the kind that suggested months of investigation. Mrs. Sullivan, your husband wasn't just laundering money for the Torino family. He was an FBI informant. For 12 years, he was providing information about their operations while appearing to facilitate their money laundering. The world tilted sideways. Robert was working for the FBI? Deep cover. Long-term investigation. The operation was so sensitive that even local FBI offices weren't informed. Your husband was helping us build cases against multiple crime families. But the money was real. The FBI allowed him to keep a percentage of the laundered funds as payment for his cooperation and to maintain his cover. Everything he left you was earned through legitimate federal cooperation. I stared at her, trying to process this revelation. So the $33 million is legally yours. Your husband died before the investigation concluded, but his cooperation over 12 years directly led to 47 arrests and the seizure of over $200 million in criminal assets. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because the investigation was ongoing. And because we weren't certain about your involvement or knowledge. Your daughter and son-in-law's fraud scheme actually helped us confirm your innocence. Victoria and Kevin didn't know any of this. They suspected criminal activity, but they had no idea about the federal cooperation. They were planning to blackmail you with information that would have actually exonerated your husband. The irony was so perfect, it was almost poetic. Victoria had tried to steal my inheritance twice, once through fraud and once through blackmail based on incomplete information. Agent Martinez, what happens now? Now? You get your money back, your daughter and son-in-law face federal charges, and you get to decide what kind of life you want to build with your legitimate inheritance. And the danger Kevin mentioned? The Torino family will be too busy dealing with their own legal problems to worry about you. We're executing search warrants across 3 states tomorrow morning. I looked around my living room, seeing it again as the site of my resurrection rather than my humiliation. Agent Martinez, can I ask you something? Of course. In your professional opinion, am I a terrible person for feeling satisfaction about Victoria's arrest? Agent Martinez smiled. Mrs. Sullivan, in my professional opinion, you're a woman who refused to be victimized. That's not terrible. That's inspiring. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my renovated house, making coffee for 2. The morning sun streamed through new windows that actually opened properly, illuminating countertops I'd chosen myself for the first time in 43 years. Good morning, Margaret. Dr. Sarah Chen, Carol's sister and my new financial advisor, appeared in the doorway, carrying a thick folder of investment reports. Good morning, Sarah. Ready for our quarterly review? The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media interviews, and personal transformation. Victoria and Kevin were each serving 18-month federal sentences. The news coverage of their crimes had made me something of a celebrity in senior advocacy circles. Your portfolio is performing excellently, Sarah said, settling at my new breakfast table. The charitable foundation is fully operational, and the scholarship fund has already selected its first recipients. The Margaret Sullivan Foundation for Elder Protection had become my primary focus. Using $15 million of my inheritance, we were funding legal aid for seniors facing family financial abuse and supporting legislative changes to strengthen elder protection laws. Any word on the documentary? Netflix confirmed the production deal. They want to start filming next month. My story had captured media attention far beyond the initial news coverage. The Mother's Revenge, an American crime story, was being developed as a limited series, with the proceeds going to elder advocacy organizations. And Victoria? Sarah's expression grew careful. She's written again. Her lawyer says she wants to apologize and ask for forgiveness. Victoria had written me 17 letters from federal prison. I'd read the first few, which ranged from self-justifying to desperate, before deciding to stop opening them. Some relationships, once broken, can't be repaired with words. Sarah, has my stance on that changed? Not according to our previous conversations, but people do evolve, Margaret. Even people who've made terrible choices. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, grieving, dependent, willing to accept whatever scraps of dignity my family offered me. That woman might have felt obligated to forgive Victoria, to rebuild a relationship based on guilt and tradition. But that woman was gone. Sarah, schedule a meeting with Victoria's lawyer. Not to reconcile, but to make something clear. What kind of thing? I want Victoria to understand that her actions had consequences beyond legal punishment. I want her to know that she destroyed our relationship permanently, and that her children will grow up knowing why their mother went to prison. That seems harsh. Good. It's supposed to be harsh. Victoria made adult choices that hurt people she was supposed to love. She doesn't get to escape the emotional consequences just because she's written some prison letters. Sarah made notes in her leather portfolio. And the grandchildren? Victoria's requested supervised visits with them. My relationship with Victoria's children will be based on their choices when they're adults, not their mother's rehabilitation efforts. The doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a delivery truck with a large package. Must be the new furniture for the studio, I told Sarah. The art studio had been my favorite renovation project. Robert's former den was now a bright, airy space where I was rediscovering my love of painting, something I'd abandoned when I got married and assumed the role of supporting wife and mother. Margaret, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever regret how this all played out? The prison sentences, the media attention, the permanent family estrangement? I considered the question while signing for my delivery. 6 months ago, I'd been invisible, a widow with no money, no home, and no prospects. Today, I was a millionaire philanthropist with a foundation, a documentary deal, and a purpose that extended far beyond my own survival. Sarah, my daughter, tried to steal everything I owned and leave me homeless. My son-in-law created forged documents and threatened me with blackmail. They showed me exactly who they were when they thought I was powerless to stop them. But they're still family. No, they're still DNA. Family are the people who protect you when you're vulnerable, not the people who exploit your vulnerability for profit. Sarah closed her portfolio, satisfied with my response. Besides, I added, look what I became when I stopped allowing them to define my worth. After Sarah left, I walked through my house, really my house now, decorated according to my taste, organized around my priorities. In the art studio, I uncovered my latest painting, a self-portrait of a woman standing in bright sunlight, her face turned toward the future. The woman in the painting looked nothing like the grieving widow who'd packed her life into 2 suitcases 6 months ago. This woman looked powerful, independent, unafraid. She looked like someone who'd learned that the best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming everything your enemies never thought you could be. Outside, the sun was setting behind trees I'd planted myself in soil that belonged to me, on property I'd defended through intelligence and courage, rather than inherited through marriage or birth. Tomorrow, I'd continue building the life I'd chosen, rather than the life others had planned for me. And if Victoria wanted to rebuild a relationship with this woman, she'd better bring a lot more than prison letters and hollow apologies. She'd better bring a complete transformation, one that matched my own. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.